Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible.
Thank you for joining the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, and I've been thinking about how I wanted to start our first show together, and I think that I should start with a bit of a confession. I'm not always a happy person. I'm far from an expert in happiness, but what I do know is that finding happiness is a pursuit that seems trivial until you've lost it and are left trying to figure out either where it went or how you're going to get back to happy. Do you realize that there are actually people in this world who wake up happy, full of joy, optimism, sunshine even? The last time I think that happened to me, I might have been about 7. It was probably Christmas morning. Knowing me, I had probably been snooping for presents and probably knew what at least 3 of them were underneath the tree. So I was clearly very excited. But, you grow up and life has a way of grinding you down and taking bits and pieces from you until you're wondering, what the heck happened to the person that I used to be? This is where I was about 4 years ago. I was fighting imposter syndrome, convinced that I was faking it at my job and that any day I would be found out. I was in a marriage that started out happy enough. We became less and less of a team, and it turned into much more of a you versus me situation. It was exhausting. My father got sick. I watched him and my mom deal with his cancer diagnosis and always felt like I had to find the funny to make other people smile, even though I was honestly scared to death of what was going to happen. I was in the room with my father, my mom, my sister, and my dad's best friend when he passed. Now, we knew that the day had been coming. However, there was kind of a major conflict happening inside of myself. There was one that was saying, start to mourn now, so it won't be so hard when the inevitable happens. And there was another part of me saying, nah, a nurse is going to come rolling in here and she's going to have the right combination of medications. She's going to put that into his IV drip. His cheeks are going to fill out again. That light's going to come back into his eyes. He's going to get color in his face again. And he's just going to get up out of the bed and say, well, kid, let's go home. I was wrong in both cases. Mourning him while he was alive didn't help at all. What I should have been doing was cherishing those last few months and those last few conversations that we had together. The nurses, bless them, they never did find the right combination of medicine to bring him back. It wasn't their fault. Shortly after Dad passed, I had my dog Lucy, who I am convinced was my doggy soulmate. She ended up having tumors in her lungs. It was completely unexpected. We took her to the vet because she had suddenly been dropping weight. We didn't know why. We found the tumors. She started to have a really hard problem like breathing, and we had to put her down. She was just suffocating. She couldn't get enough breath. So that was really hard. Then one day I was doing some yard work at my house and just decided, this is it. Today's the day. I walked into my house, packed a bag, said goodbye to my now ex-husband. And it was around this time when I realized I had lost happiness. I walked into my mom's house, put my bag down by the door, and sat in silence, wondering how I became this person. So what I hope I can share with you today is how I found my way back through all of this. How I'm here at this point today talking to you about happiness, waking up On days with absolute joy, well, there are other mornings that are still more of a struggle. Maybe starting with the imposter syndrome is the right spot for now. But what is it? And how do you know if you're dealing with it and not just a bit of self-doubt that kind of creeps into the back of your mind? Well, I found a TED Ed talk that you should check out. It's by Elizabeth Cox. In it, she talks about Dr. Pauline Rose Clance. She was one of the first to study imposter syndrome. The video is like 4 minutes and 12 seconds long or something. The last time I looked, it had like 1.6 million views. Pretty sure I myself am responsible for the 0.6 million views. It's safe to say there are a lot of people who feel this intense self-doubt. It was discovered in Dr. Clance's study that imposter syndrome crosses genders, races, socioeconomic lines. It crosses countries. It crosses all careers. It even affects people who are leaders in their fields. So your level of success doesn't matter. So why? Why is it so hard to believe that the work that we do is good enough? Why do we doubt that the people around us see us as anything other than awesome? Imposter syndrome isn't tied to depression or anxiety or any other mental illness. It simply exists. So the theory that you see in this video is that it exists because there's actually no way for us to know if our colleagues are working any harder than we are. We don't know if they feel any more confident and steady than we do. It's suggested now that the best way to push back against imposter syndrome is to simply talk to people. But who wants to make themselves that vulnerable to coworkers? Now, if you're fortunate enough to have a mentor in your life and your career, they say that you should go and talk to them and see if they've ever experienced these kinds of feelings. My guess and my experiences are that, yeah, they probably have. Now, what helps for me is this, and I quote, honey, you are not alone. You are good at what you do. You've been doing it for years. And believe me, you can't keep a Christmas gift a secret for more than 10 minutes after you buy it. There is no way you've been faking it this well for this long. End quote. Now, sometimes that's good enough and I can snap myself out of that particular circle of thinking, but sometimes it isn't. And this is where your work friends are going to come into play. Now, again, I am fortunate because I work in a place with incredible people. The backstabbing and office bullying is at a minimum. I mean, everybody has a bad day, right? But for the most part, we all are far more interested in seeing each other succeed and building each other up. So when one of us has a doubt, we just need to say it out loud. And the very loving arms of coworkers will take those doubts, walk them over to the garbage bin, and promptly set them on fire. Now, I'm not literally setting a garbage can on fire. Okay. We're just getting rid of those feelings in the most explicit and graphic way that we can. So that's my point. Okay. Now, I believe that every single person that you see has moments of self-doubt. Absolutely they do. And it isn't always work-related. Ask a parent if they've ever thought that they weren't quite enough for their kids. Ask first-time mamas. You're going to see very quickly that we are never as alone as we feel. But again, there's a vulnerability of opening up to someone, and that is what keeps us isolated. The human condition isn't unique to you, or the person in the cubicle beside you, or the person in the corner office at the end of the hallway. The trick is finding your healthy way to talk back to your self-doubter and zipping their lips shut so you can get back to being amazing. Because that's what you are, right? Amazing. Time magazine published an article about how to deal with imposter syndrome. It was published in June of 2018. It was written by Abigail Abrams. In the article, she reveals that it's estimated that 70% of us deal with these feelings at some point in our lives. So good news, it doesn't have to last forever, right? There's further confirmation that if you are in a room of 10 people, at least 7 people in that room feel like they don't deserve to be there. That's incredible, right? Further in the article, it suggested a way to deal with it is once you start to have those imposter thoughts, ask yourself if the thought is helpful or not. Once you've engaged with that particular thought and you've made a decision about it, it's time to set it aside and get back to being great and doing the good work that you're capable of doing. The website Science of People talks about imposter syndrome being a nature versus nurture issue, that some children who were told not to bring attention to themselves will often have imposter syndrome pop up in their lives as adults. The article also suggests that firstborn children are more likely to feel it than those who come second or third or fourth or, fifth. Coming up after the break, we're going to scratch the surface of grief. Again, something I've been struggling with, and I'll tell you how I thought I was dealing with it and how the death of a celebrity caused my very first breaking point that led to me taking my first step to getting back to feeling better. That's next on Life and Happiness, a GSMC podcast.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to Life and Happiness. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, and before the break, we are getting to know each other a little bit and dove into one of the things that I've been struggling with in my search to get back to happy, and that was imposter syndrome. Now, I want to talk a bit about grief, and this is a huge one. It's probably the one that I've been struggling with the most, and it has really shaped my search, and it's absolutely something that no one on the planet is going to be immune from. So my dad passed away from cancer a few years ago, and it gutted our family. We were one of those, no, let me correct that. We are one of those families that have always been super close. Even when I didn't live in my hometown, we spoke every single day. I can remember when Dad discovered MSN Messenger and the pain of knowing that he was sitting at his computer doing the one finger typing, the hunt and peck. Bless him, right? Dad was king of helping the Easter Bunny hide his Easter eggs. Me and my sister would spend hours searching around the house. Dad, of course, doing the dad thing at Christmas, being excited over a new tie or some socks. Dad was also Mr. Fix-It. We never had to worry about needing to call somebody in to fix something. Dad always knew how. And he was really, no, he wasn't, was. He really still is our superhero. Once in a while, something will happen, and I'll think, man, Dad would have loved that. Though I am glad he didn't see how Game of Thrones ended. When there was a new Star Trek or a new James Bond movie, I always hope that what they say is right and that those who passed us are still with us, because Bond was our thing. And we lived for the 007 marathon that used to happen at Christmas time, much to my mother's horror. Dad was a man of few words. He liked his fishing. He enjoyed beer. He had a great mustache, a dry sense of humor, and a really great laugh. He had a soft heart and loved his family more than I think we will ever understand. So what do you do when you lose a love like that in your life? How the heck are you supposed to put the pieces back together? My advice to you is don't do what I did. Let's start there. Don't push what you're feeling aside and try to cover it by telling yourself that you have to look after everyone around you. Cry. Cry with your family, not alone in the bathroom with the door locked and the water running. Don't do that. Talk about him. Talk about who you've lost in your life. Man, talk to them. Talk about them to anyone that will listen. And take this with a grain of salt, but truly flip the bird to anyone who tries to put a timeline on your grief. Or if someone tries to tell you that you're grieving wrong. They don't know your heart. They don't know the relationship that you've lost, and they certainly can't understand what you mean when you say that the world isn't as colorful as it used to be. If you've lost someone, I know that you understand what that sentence means. You're going to get through it, right? It's such a weird thing. I remember after Dad passed, leaving the hospital and not having the plan to return the next day. I can remember seeing kids playing basketball and riding their bikes, and people convinced that the minor inconvenience that they were facing was the biggest problem that anybody was dealing with that day, while I was standing behind them in line with my heart in 1,000 pieces. I remember that so clearly. But I want to tell you about something that a coworker told me about. And the title of this may seem a little bit crass, but stay with me as we walk down this little jaunt here, okay? So she told me that there is a club that absolutely nobody on the planet wants to belong to, but everybody on the planet eventually will be part of. And that is the Dead Parent Club. She went on to say that somehow all of the members will have a way of knowing who else belongs. There's something in you that changes, and that change becomes recognizable to other people who have gone through it and experienced that same change. You remember when you were younger and people used to tell you to never grow up? Don't grow old. People say that all the time, right? I used to always think that it meant you're not going to be able to sit cross-legged on the floor anymore when you watch TV, or you're going to get out of bed every morning and your back is going to hurt a little bit. But I've come to the conclusion that I don't think that that's what they really mean. I think what they really mean is that as you grow older, birthday parties turn into engagement parties, turn into weddings, turn into baby showers, turn into first days of school, turn into last days of school, turn into university graduations, slowly start to turn into funerals. I think that's what they were talking about. So the question is, how do you get the feeling of the crushing weight off of your chest? Because I can promise you, the person you have lost would not want to see you cry every day. How do you allow yourself to feel the sun on your face again and not feel guilty if it brings a smile to your lips? I'll tell you, it's not easy. And people, the experts have been saying for a long time that there are stages of grief. And it's always sounded like you go from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4, right? Like it's a linear line. Well, that is definitely not the way that I experienced it. It's called the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, also known as the 5 stages of grief. It's kind of how we get through bereavement. There's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Nothing about the grief experience is a progression from one step to the next. At least, again, not in my experience. Because again, not an expert. I've just been there. So I'm purely coming from you, from my point of view, from what I experienced myself. And I can assure you, you can get stuck between 2 stages for a very long time if you let yourself. So let's start with denial and what you can expect. It's not denial like telling yourself that the person that you lost isn't gone, because you know that they are. Of course you do. And if it's not evident enough by their absence in your house, it's evident by the amount of casseroles that you didn't make that are now in your fridge. Okay? With denial comes avoidance, which is really huge. Confusion is a big deal. Elation, which is going to lead you back to confusion. That's a weird one to have pop up on you. Then there's shock and fear. The shock, even though you may have been expecting it. The shock, even if you weren't. The fear of what happens next. What if I need them? What do I do tomorrow? I can tell you, for me, avoidance was the biggest. It was how I got through the denial stage the most. I was avoiding it by looking after everybody else around me, especially my mom. When I wasn't checking in with myself though to make sure that I was okay. It was way easier to deal with my mom's emotions than to feel like I could deal with my own. My own emotions felt like quicksand, and I felt like if I had started to let myself feel them, I was going to never come back from it. Then there's anger. There is so much anger. I'm mad at the hospital. Why didn't they do this? Why wasn't this done? They didn't do enough. How can we ask questions and not be taken seriously and not just be seen as the grieving family? The frustration here is so real. And for me, it was another way to avoid dealing with anything. bargaining. There's a lot here. There's the struggle to find the meaning of it all. What's the point of life when you've just watched it end and heard the last breath of your loved one leave their body? The answer is also part of this stage. You reach out to people and people will reach out to you. And I think that this is where the Dead Parent Club is probably the most valuable, sharing experiences and how you're dealing and just having the opportunity to talk to somebody who gets it. Man, it is invaluable. And it's perhaps maybe there's a piece of me that's indulging in that a little bit with this first episode of us getting to know each other a little bit. Depression, man, this is a dark one too. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You'll feel hostile. You'll get that I feel helpless. I'm just going to run away. I've picked arguments with my boss at work because I felt helpless at home. It was carrying over into my workplace. Luckily enough, I have a boss who probably showed me a lot more leniency than I deserved at the time. But my advice here is really don't yell at your boss. Save that for whoever it is that keeps cooking fish in the microwave in the kitchen at the office. Who does that? Honestly. Then there's acceptance. This is about exploring your options, making a new plan, and moving forward. In the years since Dad passed, and again, no expert, I've started to realize that once you enter the stages of grief, you don't fully leave them. It just becomes less severe. The missing them isn't fully going to go away, but what does fade is the final moments. And you'll start to go back and remember things like the Easter egg hunts and the hours of James Bond movies and the debates over who was the better captain, Captain Kirk or Captain Picard. Those, I promise you, are going to be the things that will make you smile again. And when you start to feel sunshine on your face and it makes you smile, instead of feeling guilty, you're going to thank them for that because it's their smile. I can remember just getting to a point where I started to feel like I was close to normal again. Spoiler alert, I truly wasn't. And that was when Prince died. Man, I loved me some Prince. But Prince's death spiraled me back into the 5 stages of grief again, and I had to work my way back through it. It was shortly after that where I want to pick up after the break. We're going to continue getting to know each other a little bit with the day that I decided it was time to ask for help. That's next on the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross. As this is the very first time that we've sat down and talked to each other, and me being absolutely no expert in happiness, I thought it was important to talk to you about why I'm hoping you'll stay with me as the host of the Life and Happiness podcast here on GSMC. So after my dad passed away and my dog and my marriage ended and I moved back in with my mom and life just wasn't looking the way that I thought that it would look, I had an entire week where I didn't get out of bed. Didn't want to. The thought of having to face a day was way too much. I had Netflix. I had a new dog named Chop. Still have him. He's still a brat. But that was all that I needed. I was angry and I was sad and I was allowing myself to feel waves of things that I had been pushing away since my dad had passed away. My boss eventually reached out to me with an employee help program and made sure that I made an appointment. So I think he was secretly tired of getting attitude from me, to be honest. But I caved and I called and I made an appointment. And after 3 phone sessions, the counselor on the phone thought that it would be a good idea that I speak with somebody locally. So I've never been embarrassed about it. I mean, when I hurt myself, I go to the doctor. So I was hurting in a very particular way. So I needed a doctor who specialized in that kind of pain, right? There's no big deal about that. I can remember things about her office from the very first meeting. She had this really small antique looking clock that was sitting on a bookcase. The lighting in the room was nice. It was low and it was warm, and she was just a lovely person. And before I knew it, I was just word vomiting all over her office. I told her everything that was going on. And when I finally finished talking, she said one sentence to me, and I have never forgotten it. "No wonder you're here. No one can go through all of that and be okay." And with that sentence, she validated everything for me. And that was the key that started my journey back to happiness. It was permission to feel. That was what I needed. To know that I didn't have to stop myself from feeling things, because everybody feels things. It was like I was a pressure cooker and she was letting steam out. It was validation, and it was empowering to be told, no, your feelings are normal. And no, you don't have to try to get through them on your own. There are people for that. It was reassuring. The next step was to make an appointment with my family doctor, and the two of them would work together and help me get back to a state of mind where I could start to work through everything. And yes, medication was in fact part of it. And again, no shame in that. When I have a headache, I take Advil. This was a different ache. I was taking a different kind of medication. Still am, actually. But with support of family and friends, I'm slowly working my way off of that, which is absolutely wonderful. Am I happy all of the time? Absolutely not. I don't think that that's reasonable, but I am definitely in a better place to deal with the darker days. So if you have a long stretch of dark days, here's what I want you to know. You're not alone. In an article that was written by Brandy Koski and reviewed by Timothy J. Legg, PhD, we found out that 16.2 million Americans, or 6.5% of the American adult population, have at least one major depressive episode in a given year. Seasonal depression affects up to 5% of the adult population in the U.S. As much as 80% of new moms will experience baby blues after giving birth, and 10 to 15% of women in America will have postpartum depression. You are not alone. From 2013 to 2016, 10.4% of women were found to have depression compared to 5.5% of men, according to the CDC. So what are some of the depression symptoms? Well, there are ongoing feelings of sadness, guilt, or hopelessness. Loss in interest in things that you once enjoyed, significant changes in your sleep pattern, trouble falling asleep, or trouble staying awake, or sleeping too much, or staying asleep for too long, fatigue or unexplained pain, and other physical symptoms without apparent causes, problems concentrating or remembering things, changes in appetite leading to weight gain or weight loss, physical aches and pains, feeling as though life isn't worth living, or having suicidal thoughts. And oh man, if you are having suicidal thoughts, please promise me that you're going to reach out. You don't even have to call anybody anymore. You can text. All you have to do is text HOME to 741-741, or even jump online and go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org, and you're going to find some help. If you know somebody who seems like they're going through a tough time, just make sure that information is around them somewhere. You don't necessarily have to point it out. Just tack it to the fridge or something like that. Finding your way back from depression can be a long road. I speak from experience again. Sometimes you're going to be trucking along and things are going to be great. And then one morning you're going to open your eyes and it's going to be a case of, nope, not today. Today is all rain clouds and gray feelings. But it's on those days where you need to stick with your new healthy routines the most, even more so than the days when you feel good. And I know that you've heard it a lot, and I like to sit down a lot, so I really hate to admit it, but physical activity will help you so much on the worst days. Skip the ice cream and go get on the elliptical. To be honest, I have days where I skip the elliptical and eat bread and pasta and ice cream. So I get you. Nobody is perfect. But as long as you try your best and cut yourself some slack, I promise you're going to feel so much better. To be completely honest, I am genuinely surprised, actually, by how much being physically active is a mood changer. I really didn't want to believe the experts when it came to this one, but I joined a gym. I got a personal trainer who's hilarious. I love going to the gym, and I love our training sessions together. I am deadlifting more than my own weight, which is incredible to me. I haven't really experienced a lot of weight loss, but that's not really the main goal of all of this. The main goal of all of this has been to make myself feel better. I know that I am stronger, and I know that I spend a lot more time laughing than I used to. So that's pretty major if you ask me. So again, man, when you're depressed, it is the hardest thing to even leave the house, let alone change your clothes, put on a sports bra, and go to the gym. Honestly, last thing you want to do, right? But I have experienced it time and time again on those days when I absolutely did not want to go to the gym, but forced myself to do it. You leave the gym feeling better. Sweaty, but better. Coming up after the break on the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network, we are going to talk about what happiness looks like day to day and some self-care that's not all pedicures and bathtubs.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast. I'm Melinda Barkhouse Ross. Really nice to meet you today, and I hope that we're going to be together for a minute with the Life and Happiness Podcast. Now I want to get into what happiness and how happiness can look different on a day-to-day basis. I know we just talked about physical activity and how that can really swing your day into a completely different direction, especially if you're having a really bad day. But I want to talk about some of the other things that you can do for yourself, some self-care, some self-check-in stuff that doesn't necessarily mean pedicures and bubble bath, because it doesn't have to be all of those things, right? Happiness on a day-to-day basis always looks a little bit different. Sometimes it's eating healthy and hitting the gym for a big cardio session. Other times it's bragging a bit about a new personal best that you managed to achieve at the gym on social media. Some days it's watching random documentaries on the Smithsonian Channel. It can be rearranging a dresser and purging some clothes and getting those off for donation. Happiness can show up in a lot of different ways, and the opposite is also true as well. So keep an eye out for this kind of stuff. There's a thing called the impossible task. It's usually something super small that you've done a dozen times, and you just keep putting it off. It could be replying to an email. It could be that you've not replied to the email for so long that replying to it at this point would just be weird, so you just need to delete that, right? But if you're not quite there yet, just reply to the email. It's going to make you feel better. It could be folding and putting away some clean laundry. It could be doing dishes. That impossible task may indicate that something isn't necessarily wrong, but it could show you that it's time for you to do a little check-in with yourself. Now, being mindful of how you're feeling is important. And there's a few different ways that you can check in with yourself. It's kind of like a mini meditation, this one that I'm going to tell you about. All you got to do is breathe. But be quiet while you're doing it. Try to find yourself a quiet space if you can. And you want to start with like 20 breaths in and out. And if your mind starts to wander, that's okay. Pull it back, bring it back to just focusing on your breath. And ask yourself, what's going on right now? How am I really feeling? Sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes the laundry isn't being put away just because you're feeling lazy and that's the end of it. But other times there could be something that's going on that you haven't quite started to acknowledge yet. If something does seem to be off, try to identify it. It could be describing it as a feeling, like something feels scrunched up inside and I'm not sure what that is yet. But acknowledging that the feeling is there is important. It's also going to take the pressure off of having to react to that. Remember, none of your feelings need to be final. Everything you can come back to it, but you have to acknowledge it first, right? Now, I know that there is an app that can help with this. On iPhones, I know it's called Breathe. You can even get it on your Apple Watch, right? I'm not sure what it's called on Android, but guaranteed something similar exists. And all it is a clock, and you just breathe in with a little bubble as it gets bigger, and you breathe out with the bubble as it gets smaller. And you do that for a minute. And if you feel like you need another minute, take another minute. Truly. You're in charge here. That's what it really comes down to. You can even set reminders inside of the app to sit with yourself and breathe, again, for a minute or longer if you need it. I was a massive skeptic of this one. Truly. Some days I stop multiple times in the run of a day. Sometimes I just check in with myself over the lunch hour just to be like, hey, self, how you doing in there? You all right? Usually I'm good. You can go a step further. And you can start a joy journal. Now, let's get past the fact that the title of the joy journal is a little corny, okay? It's going to be a way for you to stop and notice all of the positive things. It can even help you to see things that you've been putting off. Also, don't be fooled by the joy journal title. If something is bothering you, this is going to be the place where you can write it down on paper and get it out. Because as we have learned, bottling things up is bad for you. You want to get it out and you want to start to acknowledge it, and that's going to be the way that you're going to be able to start to deal with it. So happiness, elusive, right? Happiness really is one of those human conditions I think that we all strive for. It's one of the things that we all want to be. And when you're not feeling completely happy, you start to spiral, and it turns into like, what is wrong with me? It turns into that kind of discussion. And it's not that anything is wrong with you. It just means that you need to do a little bit of work on yourself. And you know what? If you wake up that day and you think, you know what? I'm going to treat myself to a glass of Moscato and a mint bubble bath at the end of the day, then that's the thing that you're going to look forward to that day. And there is absolutely zero things wrong with that. If you decide that today is the day I am going to go to the gym and I am going to do 10 extra minutes on the elliptical, then that's your goal for the day. Do it and achieve it. But if something happens and you don't get to the gym, or let's say you're not feeling very good after you do that first hour on the elliptical and 10 more minutes just is not reasonable, don't beat yourself up about it. Reset the goal and go after it again. That, I think, is what is tricky about goals. And with some of the things that we've been talking about, like imposter syndrome, if you set a goal and you don't achieve it, it's an opportunity for a trigger to come in and for you to start to tell yourself, see, I'm not what I think I am. I'm not doing what I think I'm doing. I'm not as good as I think I am. And that's incredibly untrue. I mean, what you miss is that you didn't do the extra 10 minutes. What you miss is that you have done a full 60 minutes. And let's say you stepped up the resistance 3 days ago, but that wasn't part of your goal system, but you did do that. So that's something for you to celebrate. These are the things that are going to help you come out of depression and come out of those dark places and start to get back to feeling happiness. When I started to do those things, and when I started to really acknowledge how I was feeling and what I was doing to myself, and even to the people that were around me, because I was not a good person to be around for a long time, really interesting changes started to happen. I got a podcast. I had an opportunity to meet, a wonderful group of women who come over to the house, and we play geeky games every couple of weeks on a Saturday afternoon and have some treats and have a couple of drinks and just enjoy each other's company. And that led to me, in order to do that, I had to clean out my basement, which I had been avoiding for a very long time. So, now there's a setup and I'm able to record things in my basement. That's a massive accomplishment. And it's something that I can fully take credit for, because It was a goal. I set it and I achieved it. And I feel really good about that goal. Another thing that happened was when I started to get over myself a little bit, which I think depression, part of it is you get so wrapped up in yourself. I started to get over myself a little bit, and I met a wonderful man. And since I met him, we've gotten married, and I'm moving to be with him soon. And I can't even start to express the happiness that has brought me, because when I went through my divorce, I didn't think that having a husband was going to be something that I was ever going to do again. I was done with all of that. I was going to be, the weird old lady who had a house on a cliff and had, chickens. And the neighborhood kids were going to be afraid to come to my house at Halloween. Like, that was what I had decided that my life was going to be. But I don't think that was ever really something that I wanted. It was just something that I was willing to settle for because I didn't think that I deserved to try again at having a happy marriage and having a family. So depression, a dark place. Happiness is a bright place, and going from one to the other is going to take time. My advice is be kind to yourself along the journey and just let it happen. That takes a lot. So what I really want to do with this podcast is I really want to make it interactive. And we're going to talk about that after the break with the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. We'll be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to GSMC's Life and Happiness podcast. I'm Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, and I want to talk to you about making this show very much a two-way kind of communication situation. And with the help of social media, it is so easy to do now. So if you ever have feedback, questions, comments, of course, Twitter, Facebook, that's going to be the place to do it. At GSMC_life on Twitter, and Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast on Facebook. Find us, like the page, and let's keep the conversation going during and after when the podcasts become active. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about something else that I struggled with a little bit when it came to this search for happiness. Like, what even is the point of it? And is happiness truly sustainable, or is it more like happiness you find in moments? For example, you're on vacation. It's a week's vacation. You're away from the job and you're away from all of those responsibilities, and you're eating good food and you're sleeping in late, and somebody else is worrying about cleaning up the room, and somebody else is making dinner, and somebody else is bringing you drinks, and all of those kinds of things are happening, and it's wonderful. But there really is a lot of time that goes into that ability to take that vacation. So are you renting happiness at that point is, I guess, the question that I'm trying to get at. Or are you building up to that week of happiness? There's certainly going to be moments of happiness over those 6 months. Please don't get me wrong there. Like, you're going to have great days at work, and you're going to have wonderful moments with your partners, and you're going to have wonderful moments with your kids, and you're going to have great achievements, and you're going to meet and set all kinds of goals. And, I guess the question is, do you believe that happiness is sustainable, or do you think it's not so much a flash in the pan? That's not what I'm getting at, but do you think that it's unreasonable to expect that you are going to be able to live in a state of constant happiness? Let us know. Hit us up on, again, Twitter and Facebook. And the Twitter, again, is at GSMC_life. And you can find us on Facebook at Golden State Media Company Life and Happiness Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. So what is happiness? According to happify.com, here's what they say. Research suggests that happiness is a combination of how satisfied you are with your life, for example, finding meaning in your work, and how good you feel on a day-to-day basis. Both of those relatively stable. Our life changes. Our mood fluctuates, but our general happiness is more genetically determined than anything else. Good news, they say, is with constant effort, it can be offset. Think of it like if you think about weight. If you eat what you want and are as active as you want to be, your body will settle at a certain weight. But if you eat less and you exercise more, your body weight will adjust accordingly. If that new diet or exercise regimen becomes part of your everyday life, you're going to stay at that new weight. If you go back to eating and exercising the way that you used to, your weight will return to where it started, and so it goes as well with happiness. So if you're making all of these changes and you're working as hard as you can and you're being conscious and you're being present and you're checking in with yourself and you're making sure that you're doing all of the right things, you're eating well, you're looking after yourself, and then you start to slip and you start to fall back into those old habits, you're going to have to work your way back into happiness again. It's not something that is finite. It's not once I get happy, I'm just going to be happy. Once you get happy, it's the work that it's going to take to stay there. It sounds exhausting, doesn't it? But nothing feels quite as good as a belly laugh and wonderful moments shared with friends and family. And I think that that should really be where we're looking for happiness. One thing that I have discovered through, I'm not going to say life experiences because I don't have a lot of money, but one of the things that I do know is that if there is something that you truly do not like to do, if it's shoveling a driveway, if you live in a climate where it snows, and you pay somebody to come and plow your driveway, honey, that is a small piece of happiness. So when they say money can't buy happiness, they're right. It can't make you feel good. But what it can do is buy your time back from doing the things that you hate to do, like shoveling your driveway. That's where I think money can buy a little bit of happiness. Maybe that's too optimistic. Maybe that's too simplistic. I'm not sure. That is definitely one thing that I have learned and will continue to preach, my goodness. So this kind of leads us into like the philosophy of happiness, which believe me, we could probably do an entire episode about. And you know what? We probably will do an entire episode about because I love me some good philosophy. But I want to talk to you about Aristotle's philosophy of happiness. There are a few things that he felt added up to equal happiness. So you have 4 things that are in balance with 2 things. So you've got pleasure, wealth, health, and honor. You add those to equal amounts of virtue and wisdom, and that is going to give you happiness. So you've got pleasure, pleasure seeking, completely reasonable, but not at the exclusion of all of your other values. Wealth and health are necessary. You can be as productive as you want to be, but if you're too poor to afford housing or suffer from chronic pain, long-term happiness is still going to be elusive, right? Honor, the old world notion of earning respect from your community. I think that still applies a lot today. We all want to be respected, right? Virtue. There's an entire philosophy of ethics that's based on thinking and acting in a virtuous manner, and it's hard to a fault. He called it the active life, meaning happiness is found in going out into your community and behaving in ways that are moral, courageous, and kind. Things that we should all really aspire to, right? And wisdom, the ability to acquire and assimilate abstract knowledge in one thing that makes us human. His contemplative life means happiness is found in pursuing self-directed learning and quiet introspection. So I think that goes a lot back into what we've already been talking about in terms of being able to pause and just focus on yourself and check in with yourself and make sure that you are good. What you want to do is really make sure that you are consuming and producing at least equal amounts. Then you're going to be in balance with what you owe the world. You're not taking anything away from it. Ideally, to achieve real happiness, according to Aristotle, what you want to do is have more that you're producing and putting into the world than you are taking from it. So, hobby crafters, man, you don't have to sell your stuff in order to, have your hobby. And I think that's one thing that we've kind of lost touch with when it comes to our hobbies. We believe that a hobby needs to be a side hustle. And I think that just adds more and more weight and frustration and stress onto things that should just be things that we do in our off time that bring us happiness. Create those things and give them to your friends. That's producing things and putting them out into the world. And honey, I know crafting is not cheap. I have seen what happens to women when a sale is on at the craft store. They turn into full contact football players. You do not want to get in between someone who knits and a yarn sale. I can tell you that for sure. That will not bring you happiness. And I think that kind of brings me back to what I was saying about when I started to meet the girls who now sit around a table and we collectively sit around and play goofy, nerdy games with each other and drink wine and eat snacks every other Saturday. And I think that could be one of the things that is actually vital to happiness, the ability to create. And the ability to spend time with people that you enjoy being around. Because really, when we sit around the table, we're not so much worried about the things that exist outside of the room that we're in. We're not worried about bills that need to be paid. We're not worried about, my kid got a D on that test. We're not worried about those things. We're at the table and we're present and we're enjoying the stories that we're telling with each other. And I think that it could be that simple. The idea of what happiness is, the ability to create and the ability to have the freedom to do that creation. I mean, having money coming from that, if you want to talk about getting paid from your hobbies, would certainly give you the ability to spend more time doing that thing. But I really think that we need to remember that it's okay to have hobbies that don't necessarily make you money and that they're just things that you enjoy doing, whether it's reading a book or picking up an extra class, through a night school, through adult learning, or if it's, just having a family game night where, you forget about the fight that you have because, the kids didn't do the dishes for you and didn't empty the dishwasher like you asked them to by the time you got home from work. You just sit down at the table and play the game and enjoy the pleasure, because it is a pleasure, of each other's company. Maybe that is one of the biggest keys to happiness. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. Again, you can reach out to us on social media. Very excited to make this very much a two-way conversation. Even if you have topics that you would like to explore under the umbrella of happiness, let me know. Again, it's GSMC_life on Twitter, and you can find us on Facebook as well. Very excited to be part of the show and very excited to have you join us and make your voices heard in the show as well. We're going to be right back with our final thoughts on the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. Hang on.
Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you.
Welcome back to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. I'm Melinda Barkhouse Ross, and man, we have covered a lot of ground. I've done my best to try to tell you why doing a podcast about life and happiness is important to me and how I came around to wanting to share my experiences in looking for happiness. Again, not an expert, and through my own actions kind of perpetuated the feelings that I was experiencing, and they became so comfortable that it was truly hard for me to find my way back from depression and all of that negative self-talk. But I'm here to tell you, it's possible. After coming through all of it, I know that I'm not the only person to face these particular things. And now that I've faced them, I actually feel like it's a little bit of my responsibility to help others who might find themselves in a dark, difficult place. I'm sure that's putting a lot of self-importance on myself, but I have had people help me. So I see this as a way to pass on the good stuff. So now that you know all about me and what my approach is here, I would again love to hear from you on social media. You can find the podcast on Twitter at GSMC_life. Let me know you're there. I'd love it if you stopped by and said hello. My hope is that from today's episode, you take away that grief isn't always a start and finish situation. It certainly isn't a straight line, and it absolutely can't be something you rush. But you will come out of it on the other side with more empathy for people. If you've decided to make yourself hard on the outside, going through grief is going to soften you, but make you stronger at the same time. Imposter syndrome. Remember, when that little voice pops up again, just think about that room with 10 people in it. 7 of them feel like they don't deserve to be there. It's shocking, but some of our greatest people have suffered from imposter syndrome, including Michelle Obama, Einstein, and Maya Angelou. You know, it's just occurring to me now this year at the Grammys, thinking back to it. Remember Billie Eilish with her multiple wins? Do you think that was embarrassment that she was feeling when she kept winning? Do you think it was fear of backlash from the fans of the other artists who lost to her in those categories? Or do you think it could have been a little bit of imposter syndrome? Interesting. If I ever get a chance to talk to her, that would be an interesting conversation, no matter which one of those things it was, or if it was none of the above, I suppose. Don't forget, reaching out for help and accepting help, if it's offered, is never a weakness. In fact, it's always a sign of strength. I think it's a clue that you know yourself incredibly well. And I think there's nothing as great as going to a professional therapist and getting some help. Well, I mean, except going to the hair salon. Hairstylists are always some of the most wise people on the planet, not to mention the value of coffee or cocktails with your best friend and a good venting sesh. Those are always very valuable. But I want to say again, thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast. I have been happy to be your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross. Again, make sure you find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you don't mind dropping a little 5-star review and maybe some kind words or thoughts about happiness, that would be incredible and appreciated far more than you could possibly know. Again, thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find the show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast.